purpose?
Yeah, and we're thinking in human terms, and if these are aliens, they're thinking in alien terms, and they're not doing things for our purposes. They're doing things for their purposes, and what those purposes are, we really don't know. We have a lack of information, and we have conflicting information as well. So it's very difficult for us. And I wrote an essay on my own blog about the title of it was "What the Black Death Can Teach Us About the UFO Problem," an analogy. And my point was that during the 14th century, during the Black Death, because of their level of knowledge, because of their world outlook, and how they believed the world worked, there was no way that they could figure out why the Black Death was occurring. And the cause of the Black Death wasn't really established for another 500 years because people at the time, they didn't have the technology and they didn't have the methodology and they didn't have the concepts to understand what was going on. And I think that we may be in a very similar position. There's a quadrant that I outlined in my essay that you know that you know, and you know that you don't know, and you don't know that you know, but you don't know that you don't know. And that's the part of the quadrant that I think that we're in. We don't know what we don't know. And maybe 500,000 years from now, well, people will be looking at back at our behavior today, and they'll go, why didn't they do this, or why didn't they do that? And it was because, well, we didn't know that we didn't know that.
I don't know. How about when you've been looking at all these documents, have anything pointed out to anything, what is going on? Again, I know going through these documents, how do you tell which ones are legit and which ones aren't, you know? Well, the documents that I viewed have been in the National Archives and in the Library of Congress, so they are legitimate by definition. And I've talked about this before, I believe, on your program and in other talks, but the first thing that I did when I went in the National Archives here was I went to look at the so-called Cutler-Twining memo. And it's an MJ-12 document that appeared mysteriously in the National Archives in 1987. And that document has a memorandum attached to it that was written by the supervising archivist at the time about how they had done a search on MJ-12 in various government departments and various archive sources and couldn't find anything on the subject. So this memorandum was basically a warning that the document was probably not legitimate, and it's probably the only document in the National Archives that has a memo attached stating that it's possibly fake. But just about everything else, I mean, in the National Archives is legitimate because they're government records. So I can go in there and I can. One thing I did was I went through the records of the Research and Development Board Executive Council during the 1947 period, during the time that Vannevar Bush was running it, and Vannevar Bush was one of the top people that was alleged to be an MJ-12 member. And I've also been to the Library of Congress manuscripts division, and I've been through a lot of the papers and the records for Nathan Twining. And, you know, those are, of course, legitimate. They were letters, correspondence by Nathan Twining, and his daily logs. So I learned a lot from looking at that. Wow. And now since you moved where you're at, I mean, how many days a week do you pursue this?
Every day. Every day that I can. My goal is to do 4 solid hours of work every day. And I get up and, you know, I do my morning routine and then I work. I pretty much get my 4 hours in pretty much by noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Then I attend to other personal business. And if I get on a tear where I'm looking for something in the National Archives or at the Library of Congress, you know, I'll go down there. Now, I'm only 10 minutes away from the National Archives, and I'm about an hour or so away from downtown where the Library of Congress is. And the last couple of days, I've been going to the Library of Congress, and
the wonderful thing about that, Gary, is that I was requested by a friend to look up something, and there's a book about James McDonald, who was a top UFO researcher in the 60s. He unfortunately committed suicide in 1971.
Now, can I ask you a question? Now, you said he committed suicide. Now, do you feel it was he actually committed suicide, or did somebody murder him and make it look like a suicide? Have you ever checked into that?
The information that I have is that his marriage was on the rocks, and his wife had had an affair. She'd taken up with someone else. He had become depressed. He had actually attempted suicide with a gun and missed his brain, and it actually severed the optic nerve, and it blinded him. And he was in recovery for some weeks or months. And then he took a cab. This is in Tucson, Arizona. He walked out of the university where he was working and took a cab out into quote-unquote countryside near Tucson, Arizona. The cab driver dropped him off at an intersection, and his body was found a couple of days later in a wash. So there's the reasonable expectation is that he committed suicide on his own.
Interesting. The reason why I ask is there were so many people that were connected in that time frame with ufology, both, scientists, non-scientists, reporters and stuff that kind of met weird deaths.
Yeah. One strange instance was Paul Shartle, and Paul Shartle was involved in the Emanager affair, and he was involved in this offering to Robert Emanager and company of this film of the alleged Holloman landing. And this is an incident where it was offered to Emanager, and it was later withdrawn. It was during the Nixon administration. And the film was, the audiovisual division was at Norton Air Force Base in California. And this Paul Shartle person was connected with that. He was working for the Air Force. And he died suddenly in a car crash at a time. I'd like to check into this further, and I don't want to give out misinformation, and if I do, please someone correct me. But I believe that he died in a car crash at the very time that he was trying to reconnect and provide more information. So that's one instance I know of something that is definitely worth looking into.
I know during that time frame there was a lot of people that were involved, working in the government. Scientists, for example, a bunch of them died in like a month period. Everything from a car accident to a heart attack to all kinds of stuff, which I really think is strange.
Well, these intelligence agencies like the KGB and presumably the CIA, they have toxicology divisions. And the KGB would occasionally poison people. They had a whole set of poisons that they could use. And I'm not going to accuse the CIA of doing this because I don't know, but presumably they have similar knowledge. Maybe they could, some nefarious group can cause a sudden heart attack, something like that. It appears natural.
Well, one of my acquaintances has been on the show numerous times in the past, and he was with the DOD for like 13, 14 years. They said, quote unquote, a government agency can be parked in front of your house across the street and point something at you, and you're going to keel over dead with a heart attack.
Yeah. Well, that's not very encouraging, is it?
No, and I really took it very seriously because I also have another friend at work who's retired that worked with another government agency that starts with a big C. And he says, yeah, we have that type of technology.
Uh-huh. So I guess we have to mind our P's and Q's, huh?
I don't know. I mean, I sometimes get weird things doing this talk show, talking about aliens and abductions, but I don't know. I'm now 68 years old, and I'll take something that William Shatner just said. He's 88. He said, "Hey, I've done it all." I'm 68. I'm not going to really worry. All my kids are adults, and so I just take each day as it comes.
Yeah, and I have something to live for. I have something to get up every day for, so I just keep going.
Yeah.
I'm 66.
Yeah, you're a young kid yet. But, it scares me because, I can usually tell when I get a guest on, especially when they're talking about their abduction, which ones are being truthful and which ones are making up a story to get their 2 minutes of fame, out there. And I tell you, you can hear the stress in somebody's voice that when you really, when I buy their story, how's that? Because you can hear the stress when they're talking. You start talking about certain things and they're scared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And they like to have answers, and they don't get answers.
No, that's the whole problem. Even like not Timothy, but going back to Terry Lovelace. How would you like to feel? You do the right thing. You go back to your base. You work in the hospital as a medic. You tell them what happened, because you feel that you need to report it, and you're treated like you're a criminal.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you get pilots that will report a sighting. There was one I was reading about the other day or hearing about, and he said that was the biggest mistake he ever made. He wished he'd never reported it, and they put him through the ringer, and your possibilities for advancement go away, and like you said, they treat you like a criminal. And they put some people through extensive interrogation, possibly even hypnosis, possibly sodium pentothal or other drugs. And they're told either it didn't happen or don't ever talk about it again. And we hear these rumors, we hear these reports that people are threatened, that their families are threatened. It's a frightening scenario, but what we don't have is solid confirmation and proof.
That's the whole problem. We're coming up to break here in about 2 minutes, but I can say this, that can the public really handle? Because, we've been brainwashed since Roswell. Okay, the military came out and said, well, we got wreckage from a UFO. Then they changed it to a balloon. Then a few years back, the Air Force came back and they described Roswell. It was a weather balloon. But, it don't make sense, because when they were describing it now, they were describing it like Mylar weather balloon and stuff like that. Well, they didn't have Mylar back then. It was a rubber, weather balloons they used back then. The stories just don't jive. And then if you start looking at all what has taken place, it's like they don't want us to know. And there's a reason. I really don't think we don't know what the agenda is. There is people missing. We don't know what's happening to them. People are being abducted. Some people are lucky, they're returned. Some people maybe aren't. Maybe some people are being, who knows what is being used with them. We just don't know. But if the government came out, Tom, and said, look, we can't defend you. We can't protect you. We don't know what's going on ourselves. But we know that people are vanishing, and we can't stop it. How is the people going to handle that? I want you to think about that. We're going to be back in 8 minutes. You're listening to me, Gary, on Night Dreams Talk Radio, James Christbaum, and our great guest tonight, Tom Whitmore. So stay tuned. We'll be back in 8 minutes.
Maggot was a biker and drove his motorcycle very fast. Drove a big chop Harley with a gang color jacket and ran down Citizens for laughs. He had an old lady named Petula who packed